Good morning. You're watching The Morning Show here on Arise News. I'm Steve Ayorinde.
Hello and welcome. I'm Adesola Kiwasage. We've got a great show lined up for you over the next 2 hours. So we just urge you to sit back and let's kickstart your day because the morning show begins right now.
President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, earlier this week raised the alarm over the escalating cost of food and the growing threat of hunger across the country, calling for urgent, coordinated national action to avert a deepening food crisis. Senator Akpabio warned that rising food prices and hunger now pose a grave challenge to national stability and citizens' well-being, citing a recent United Nations projection that up to 35 million Nigerians could face hunger this year. He described the situation as a national emergency requiring immediate legislative, executive, and societal response. However, it doesn't seem to be all doom and gloom, with a number of major stakeholders in the agricultural sector holding the view that with the right mix of policy consistency, investment, technology adoption, and climate resilience, the country can significantly improve productivity, reduce import dependency, and strengthen food security. Against this backdrop, we will, on this installment of the Morning Show, engage in conversation with Segun Alabi, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Davidola Nigeria Limited and founder Davidola Farms. And that conversation shall be anchored on the Senate President's warning, challenges to food security in Nigeria, and the way forward.
That's correct. And as we make progress, we shall bring the conversation closer to our dear Lagos State, where we begin to interact with Honorable Jude Ojo, a community leader and victim of the recent demolition of property deemed as contravening the state government's regulations on specially designated areas. And he shall be here in the company of Hassan Soweto, a member of the #EndBadGovernance Movement Lagos chapter. We shall attempt to establish through that conversation the extent to which the Lagos State government has gone to interact with the affected persons and communities, the nature of demands on the table, including compensation for lives and property lost, possibility of concessions, and the way forward.
Indeed, but on a day like this, our starting point will always be the week that was, the segment of the show during which we take a look back at some of the top stories that made headlines within the week, and then wrap things up with a review of major stories on the front pages of Nigerian newspapers. It's going to be all that and a whole lot more today on The Morning Show.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Now it's time for the week that was. Let's take a look at the top stories that made headlines around the globe this week. And we're going to start with Nigeria and Turkiye, which have pledged to deepen cooperation on security, defense, and trade, with Ankara setting a 5 billion bilateral trade target, more than double the current levels. The commitments were announced during President Bola Tinubu's state visit with Turkiye, marked by full ceremonial honors and the signing of 9 bilateral agreements. Arise State House correspondent reports from the Turkish presidential palace.
Under tight security and full state honors, President Bola Tinubu's vehicle is escorted by cavalry troops along the avenue leading to Turkey's presidential complex, accompanying him to the protocol gate. He is received at the main entrance by President Erdogan before greeting the Guard Regiment ceremonial unit. During the ceremony, President Tinubu briefly stumbled on the blue carpet laid out for the reception. He regained his footing and continued with the program without disruption. The two leaders then moved into closed-door talks, followed by an expanded bilateral meeting involving senior ministers and security officials. They later emerged to witness the signing of cooperation agreements aimed at strengthening ties across key sectors.
The Federal Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Bianca Odumeko-Ojukwu, will be exchanging the Memorandum of Understanding on Cooperation in the field of media and communication between the government of the Republic of Turkey and the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
In total, 9 agreements were signed, covering defense cooperation, trade and investment, media and communications, higher education, diaspora affairs, women and social services, diplomatic training, and the establishment of a joint economic and trade committee. Briefing the press, President Erdogan described Nigeria as a strategic partner, saying the new trade mechanism would help raise bilateral trade from around $2 billion to $5 billion, while also expanding defense and intelligence cooperation.
Terrorist organizations emerging, particularly in Africa's Sahel region, unfortunately pose a threat to the peace of the entire continent. We stand by the friendly people of Nigeria in their fight against terrorism under the leadership of President Tinubu. In fact, today, we addressed opportunities for closer cooperation in the fields of military training and intelligence.
President Tinubu thanked Turkey for its openness to partnership, stressing Nigeria's role in African peace and stability, and warning that insecurity on the continent has global implications. He says cooperation on trade, security and development is central to building an inclusive economy and restoring peace and prosperity.
How do we build an inclusive economy together? That's what we discuss. How do we reform and get everybody, vulnerable people in particular, involved in our economies? How do we develop this country, give peace and stability to the world, and particularly the necessary peace and stability of the continent of Africa?
Nigeria's Minister of State for Foreign Affairs highlights the agreement on cooperation between the foreign ministries of both countries to establish a foreign service academy.
Our foreign service needs the expertise, the training that Turkey can offer. With this agreement, there will be exchange programs. There will be more coordinated learning capabilities for our officers. And I believe that it's going to be a win-win situation, not just for Nigeria, but also for Turkey as well.
Attention now turns to implementation and how quickly these commitments translate into action, following what both sides describe as a historic set of agreements. Adesoa Omorwan, Arise News.
Well, Adesoa Omorwan, our State House correspondent, has been keeping us abreast on the developments from the Nigeria-Turkey bilateral engagements. Now, this is very important, particularly when we're talking about this new multipolar world order. As people have been saying, it's no longer East versus West. It's no longer about the big powers. It's about how the middle powers rise to the occasion. And that's a conversation we were having last week as well when we were talking about the World Economic Forum in Davos and the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, speaking about how countries are going to need to embrace this new world order and turn away from American hegemony or maybe Chinese dominance. In the past week, we've also seen the Prime Minister of Britain, Keir Starmer, go to China, the first British Prime Minister in nearly a decade to go to China and strengthen ties with the Chinese. We've also seen some statements from America kicking back at that. But we've also been asking, what is Nigeria going to do when it comes to its power? Nigeria is a significant regional power here in West Africa. Of course, we're the most developed, the most populous black nation, but also Turkey is a very important strategic power there. They bridge essentially the Eurasia and Middle East corridor. They are a very diversified economy, particularly when it comes to manufacturing, construction, energy, and they also have a credible military and NATO. They're part of the NATO partnership, something that has been suffering recently under the Trump era. So this looks like a good thing for Nigeria to do in terms of going in a positive direction in this new world order. I would say it's not about aid anymore. I think we're seeing more South-South alliances, for example, when Nigeria went to Brazil earlier. So I do think in terms of strategic partnership, Turkey is a solid partner for us to go towards. The only thing now, as Adesua mentioned in her report, is implementation. Are we going to go beyond MOUs and are we actually going to build on these bilateral treaty agreements? But I do think in terms of not necessarily, I think it's a good stepping stone. You know, some people want us to only align with people who we might have moral alignment with, but I think it's a new world order.
Well, I mean, I totally agree with you to a very large extent. And I think that the questions that you raised, like the one that Adesua or Marwan also posed, you know, are the important questions to ask, given Nigeria's importance within the region and, of course, the strategic alliance that we are hoping to forge with Turkey. Which is not something new. And I think that that is the basis upon which we should begin to analyze, you know, that very important state visit of President Bola Tinubu there. Momentarily, you know, the whole thing was colored by the fact that he tripped at some point. But of course, like, you know, from the report from Adesua, I mean, that was just momentary. I mean, anybody can trip and, you know, and stumble. And then he moved on. And then he delivered, you know, great speeches throughout the meeting. If there are areas that his handlers will need to look into going forward, particularly in terms of protocol, in terms of, you know, guiding him and protect, you know, those are the things that they should look at. But then coming to the key issues, 9 agreements that were covered in detail. My point would therefore be as beautiful as they may look on paper, I didn't hear anything about the fact that almost similar bilateral agreements were signed, not once, but twice, under the Buhari administration. If you recall, in 2017, Buhari also had a similar state visit, you know, to Turkey. The same President Erdogan, you know, received him. $5 billion was also on the table. You know, it was basically recurrent. 4 years after that state visit to Turkey, the president, you know, of Turkey also came to Abuja, you know, and Buhari received him. You know, similar things were also signed. Talks about security, talks about partnership, you know, talks about training, the sort of thing that the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, you know, Bianca Ojukwu, was talking about. Under Buhari, Nigeria and Turkey were basically strategic partners. So my point, therefore, is that if $5 billion was the key figure at that time, why is it that, you know, how many years after, in 2026 January, what we are also now hoping and praying for is that the trade deals between Nigeria and Turkey will grow to $5 billion from the $2 billion thereabout. You know, that it doesn't mean that all the things that Buhari and his government promised to do with Turkey never materialized. And therefore, when we're asking the question that you posed about implementation, maybe it would be very important to review the agreements that Buhari signed, given that it is the same party, given that there ought to be a kind of continuity, but then it didn't materialize, so that we can learn from the mistakes that the Buhari administration make and not just look at symbolism of going to Turkey and signing, you know, MOUs, etc. The president's predecessor did the same thing. Let's find out what went wrong and what we can do better. But I also noticed that within, you know, surprisingly, the foreign minister, you know, Tuga, was not part of the trip. Is the minister, you know, Minister of State for Foreign Affairs that well. I don't tend to see him quite often with the president when he travels, which, you know, might raise some questions as to if we have a foreign minister, how close is he to the president? How well is he performing his duties? Especially when the president is making an important state visit like that. You will expect that you see the foreign minister, even if you have to see the two of them together, the two ministers in that, you know, ministry. Is there something going on that we are not aware of? You know, those are the kind of things that media will be interested in, and the public too. But of course, in totality, I think that it was a trip that went quite well. Great speeches on paper, as I said, but then let's find out what we can improve upon so that in another 4, 5, 6 years' time, We won't go back to Turkey and be signing a $5 billion, $5 billion, a bilateral agreement. But, on the face of it, it was okay. All right, the Nigerian military high command earlier this week finally admitted that some of its officers recently plotted to unseat President Bola Tinubu. In October last year, there were reports that officers ranging from the rank of captain to brigadier general were arrested and detained by the Defense Intelligence Agency for attempting to overthrow President Tinubu's government. The panel, which probed the arrested officers, has submitted its findings to the president. Director Defense Information at Defense Headquarters, Major General Samaila Huba, confirmed that those with cases to answer will be formally arraigned before appropriate military judicial panel to face trial in accordance with the Armed Forces Act and other applicable service regulations. Interesting, isn't it, that finally 3 months after, all the rumors and the small talks about a coup, an attempted coup, indiscipline in the military has, finally come forward to admit in some ways, even though they've been careful not to use the word coup or attempted coup, to say that, yes, 16 officers have been rounded up and investigations have been done, and that they have sent the report to the president. For me, there are 3 key, very important issues around there very quickly so that we don't, belabor the issue of a coup. One will be the intervention of the media, and why I think that the military, authorities should at least give credit to the Nigerian media, given the investigative reports that came out in October of last year. If you recall that this were the democracy that we are enjoying today, the credit shouldn't go to politicians who fought the military alone. A very solid partner in ensuring that democracy returned, and we have had more than 26 years of it uninterrupted, was also the Nigerian media. And I think that the Nigerian media is still playing that important role as a formidable, watchdog for the society in exposing that. And therefore, to have had the military come back and say, oh yes, we have now investigated and 16 officers have been rounded off. There's another gentleman who has a form of affiliation with Nollywood, who has also been who's been said to have been arrested in connection to the thing that he knew about the coup, but no word to say that the media was right. And if you recall what happened the other time when an aircraft of the Nigerian Army was seized in Burkina Faso, the media said, this is what we think is going on. There was a denial 1 week after, they came back. That sort of a thing should, the right of the citizen to know should be paramount. And the media haven't done its job, should at least be commended. The other part will be that how will the military proceed? They said that they have sent a report to the president. For what should the president do with it? Because this is a military, some officers allegedly trying to unseat an administration, a government that was democratically elected. It is not like what you have in a typical coup setting, officers trying to unseat, a general in power. What therefore does the law say? And how does that conform with the Military Act? Does it have to go as we expect that it will go to court and not to have a kind of court martial so that we know what they are being tried for? Treason or treasonable felony. Those are the things that will come out in many days to come. And of course, finally for me, will be the area of, finally, the idea of coup and all the negative things that are associated with it, are coming back to Nigeria. Given our place in West Africa, this is not looking good. And therefore, beyond the fact that, yes, trials will happen, those who have behaved badly will be dealt with. But then does it signal a kind of a fear and worry and concern for a group of officers in Nigeria, from captain to brigadier general, to be thinking of unseating a democratically elected government? We should be worried and express concern that if there are areas that the government would need to look into that may be fueling on the ground agitation for that sort of a thing, it should be dealt with, even though we condemn it, and we will, always condemn any attempt to remove a democratically elected, government.
I fully agree, and I'm going to go off of the third point you made there, because I fully agree. We will always condemn any attempt to remove a democratically elected government. And I think it's very interesting here, because part of the reports that we're seeing, and these are still allegations because the military hasn't given us the full picture, is that these men did originally attempt to take out this coup during the transition period between Buhari and President Tinubu. And so it's not as though they waited to see how the Tinubu administration functioned. It seemed that it was something that was decided and being planned even before he was sworn in. And I think that is a very interesting point here, because it's not about the performance necessarily of the Tinubu administration. It's about truncating the transition and truncating democracy itself and that transition of power. At least that is what we're seeing. Originally in October, when the 16 servicemen were arrested, who were told that it had to do with indiscipline, not necessarily a coup attempt. However, it does seem that we're getting different information now. As you said, 3 months down the line, it says there are allegations that they had purchased 32 vehicles, that there was reconnaissance, there was intelligence gathering, and there was planning to kill members of our government here. Now, when we talk about, because you also brought up Burkina Faso when you're talking about the media's role here, just this week, Burkina Faso has abolished political parties in its entirety. The whole process of democracy there seems to have been abolished under Traoré, who is now there, the leader of the country. But also Traoré, I always tell people that I think people don't understand the coup nature in Burkina Faso, because Traoré didn't take over from a democratically elected president. He took over from someone else who had done a coup. And when we're talking about the coup, people talk about the coup belt in the Sahel. Nigeria has managed to stay away from that, and we have not had a successful coup in decades. We've also seen Togo manage to stay away from that, even though it was just by a whisper there. But I do think you're right in that we need to think about the root causes for this coup culture, whether it's entrenched corruption, pervasive poverty, lack of belief in the democratic system itself. If people do not believe they're credible elections, if they feel disenfranchised in society, if they feel that there's poor treatment of our military personnel or our security personnel and their welfare, these are the type of things we need to be taking seriously moving forward, because we cannot just talk about what's right on paper. We must also talk about what's right in reality and people's lived realities. We are sending our servicemen to fight battles on different fronts. There is a lot of talk about the welfare, not only just for the army, but for the police itself. We're going to talk about later about hunger, in the land and people, and we're also going to talk about the Electoral Act, right, and lack of belief in credible elections. So all these issues that we're seeing cause coups in other African nations are issues that we can relate with in Nigeria, and we need to be proactive, I believe. We cannot be reactive after the fact. We can't wait for another plot and hope it fails. We need to fix the underlying issues.
Absolutely.
And that is a word for the people in power.
Absolutely. We shouldn't wait to become another Nigeria,
no.
For example, given what is still happening there
I don't want
yesterday.
I don't want military coup. I don't want there to be shootout near the airport. Please, let's manage ourselves accordingly. Now let's move on to our next story, where the Supreme Council for Sharia in Nigeria has renewed its call for the removal of the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, Joash Amukmitan, ahead of the 2027 general election, describing him as a threat to the credibility of Nigeria's democratic process. The council warned that Muslims would neither recognize nor legitimize any election conducted under Amukmitan's leadership, citing what it described as serious integrity and neutrality concerns. The president of the Supreme Council of Sharia in Nigeria, Sheikh Bashir Umar, said the council's stance was based on what it described as the INEC chairman's questionable antecedents, particularly a legal brief he allegedly authored suggesting that the existence of a Christian genocide in Nigeria, a claim the federal government has repeatedly dismissed. This is, for me, a very odd one. We have a very odd situation going on in Nigeria. If the allegation that Muslims will not judge the credibility of an INEC chairman that has been appointed by a Muslim president who has a Muslim vice president. In fact, our first Muslim ticket in Nigeria seems very odd, seems maybe slightly political. Now, this pushback against Christian genocide, the use of the word genocide, we've spoken about this, I think, endlessly, and I don't want to go back and beat a dead bush, because I feel that there have been submissions to every single part of this. I do think that we have a problem in Nigeria when we are politicizing our identities in this way. I don't understand why the Sharia Council should be speaking about the INEC chairman's appointment. We just spoke about credibility of elections and how dicey this can get, and I want to know your opinion on this. But I know we're a federation, we're a multitude of people from different tribes and different religions, whether it's Islam or Christianity, or people, we do have people who are traditional worshippers across the country. I do not understand this. I don't understand this insistence of aligning appointments with religion. We have federal character, and some people saying that we might no longer practice that truly with the Emilio-Con government. But I do think that I think they're a little bit out of bounds in this instance. I mean,
that would be my sentiment, actually. And I know that this subject matter, it wears the toga of religion, but at the same time, you can see vestiges of politics, all around it. The position of the Sharia Council is pretty similar to that of MURIC, which had, I think twice now, called for the removal of the INEC chairman, Professor Josh Amukwiton, essentially on account of the fact that he had authored a legal opinion in the past, where he admitted, in part or in all, that there was genocide of some sort against Christians in Nigeria. The important thing would be that what is the basis upon which the Sharia Council is asking for an appointee of the president who went through National Assembly screening to be removed. They're not asking that he should be removed on account of his religion. They're asking on account of the views that he expressed before he got to office, before he got appointed. Views bordering on the fact that he acknowledged that Christians were being killed in certain parts of Nigeria, and he identified the fact that a terrorist were behind it. I do not know which part of that the Sharia Council or MURIC has a problem with, because the legal opinion didn't in any way indict another Muslims or say anything about religion. It's about those who wear the toga of religion to commit atrocities, and that in identifying that a good chunk of those that they are killing were Christians was enough to cry for help, which was the basis of the legal opinion that Professor Amukwiton, reportedly offered. And I don't see the presidency is aware, the National Assembly is aware, but the DSS and all the agencies of government that was involved in passing. And therefore, why is this coming now? And then saying that to allow him to conduct the election might jeopardize the 2027 elections. I don't think that is right. I don't think that it is correct. I don't think that the opinion that he expressed, for which we have now sat down with the United States of America to say that assist us in dealing with the threat that many people have complained about. The same thing that we took to Turkey to say that we want more of the strategic alliance and assistance that we've always had with you in dealing with terrorists. Will the Islamic, the Sharia Council are now therefore saying that we shouldn't fight terrorists or terrorism no matter what toga they may wear? I don't think that would be right. And the major protection anyway would be to those who live in affected areas, whether they are Christians or Muslims. I don't think that it would be right to tie the coming elections and the electioneering to Professor Josh Amupiton's opinion in the past. Does this stand by his opinion now? I don't think it matters, because we have seen the fact that the whole world is now interested in how we are dealing with the issue of, terror act in the north. Let him carry on with the assignment that he has been given, and let us look forward to having a good election in 2027. If there is anything to cry about, it will be that the Electoral Act should be speedily, addressed.
That's our next story.
Absolutely, which is our next story. And I think that we should just go right into it. All right. The Senate has again delayed passage of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, opting to set up an ad hoc committee on the recommendations of its Electoral Committee. This has dashed the hopes of many Nigerians, hoping that the Senate will pass the bill this Thursday for the amendments to be in place for the 2027 general election. Our rights correspondent, Omo Bazwaye, tells us more.
For the second time in 1 week, the Nigerian Senate failed to pass the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. After every other matter on the other paper was stepped down to allow lawmakers deliberate on the report of his Electoral Committee, Senate on Thursday went into a closed-door session for more than 2 hours. When the doors reopened, President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, announced the decision to set up an ad hoc committee to make greater input and properly compile the opinion of lawmakers regarding the Electoral Act Amendment Bill.
A closed session on the ongoing amendment to the Electoral Act 2022. The Senate has set up a small committee to further make contributions, galvanize, distill all the opinions of the civil senators and present them to us for final deliberation on Tuesday.
The high-powered committee, which is chaired by Senator Adeniyi Adegbomire, who currently serves as Chairman Senate Committee on Judiciary, Human Rights and Legal Matters, is given the next 2 days to complete the assignment and revert to the Senate for further deliberation next Tuesday.
And has also included very ranking senators as members. The Senior Senator Adamu Alero, the Senior Senator Waziri Tamboa, the Senior Senator Adams Oshimole, the Senior Senator Mohamed Goje, the Senior Senator Tony Woye, the Senior Senator Taito Zam as members. The committee has 48 hours, or at most 3 days, in which to conclude its assignments and refer to the Senate before our next plenary.
Some of the amendments being proposed include a new subsection 3 on page 45 of the bill that seeks to check manipulation of results and ballot box snatching through electronic transmission of results from each polling unit to RF Portal in real time. Such electronic transmission shall be done simultaneously with the physical collation results. Section 22 of the proposed Electoral Act Amendment Bill seeks to increase the fine for offences of vote buying and selling from 500,000 naira to 5 million naira and a 10-year ban on perpetrators from eligibility to contest elections in Nigeria. Others include voting rights for inmates and a term of 2 years imprisonment for a person that financially and materially induces delegates for the purpose of influencing the outcome of conventions. Omo Bazwaye, Arise News.
All right. I mean, that was disappointing, wasn't it? Given the fact that the House has already passed, the bill, and everybody was basically looking forward to the Senate to do the same thing. It's a new year; they have reconvened, and expectations were high. But here we are. Akpabio and his team are saying that this is an important bill. We need to look at it carefully, look at it all over again, because it's an election year and that things have to not be done in a haste. But then you've been looking at it, forever. You followed what even the House of Reps were doing. What are the areas of concern? What are you uncomfortable with? What is the idea that we are trying to achieve, by repealing the Act of 2022 and having the Electoral Act 2025 to deal with areas that can guarantee that elections that are coming next, will be generally acceptable by the people. So all eyes on the Senate, isn't it, and see what will come out of it.
Very funny enough, it's not just all eyes on the Senate, it's also all eyes on the House of Representatives, because on that same Thursday when the Senate was supposed to, they had stepped down every other issue so they'd be able to debate this Electoral Act with 19 proposed amendments. Yeah. They went into executive session. It was a closed-door session to discuss this. That same day in the Green Chamber, just opposite, the only motion on notice was a recommittal of clauses on the same Electoral Act. Because, yes, the House of Representatives had passed it, but there was, chatter that members of the House of Representatives wanted to make sure that they were aligned with the version the Senate was expected to pass so that they would not have to have a conference after the passage by the Senate, and so that we would not have legal hurdles going forward. Now, that motion on notice, that recommittal of the clause of Electoral Act, was also step bound by the House of Representatives after an executive closed session in the House. Now, if both chambers are having closed-door sessions to discuss the same act, my academic deduction is going to be that the issues is not in the National Assembly, but from the executive. Because every single bill that concerns the executive that the president is going to have to pass, I don't want to call it a rubber stamp National Assembly, but it does seem that they are always in chorus with what the president wants. Just the day before, of course, in the House of Representatives, they passed a 58 trillion naira budget without debate for second reading. We were here when we changed our national anthem in one day. We have seen that when bills come from the executive, even if it's the state of emergency in Rivers State, we do not have this tense back and forth. We saw in the Senate they had that process start with Senator Lalong chair a committee.
He was absent, wasn't he?
Yes, but they said he was absent and so they were not able to present. But again, as someone who sits in the Green Chamber, I can tell you if the chairman is absent, the deputy chairman can present. This does seem that there have been machinations to draw this process along. And I'm just saying this is an academic deduction. I'm not saying that this is exactly what is happening. I do get your point. But we see how processes work for other bills and other matters. Yeah. And if we see this matter being so far drawn out, then the question must be, is the issue within the chambers of the Green Chamber or the Red Chamber, or is this issue coming from the executive? Because one thing about President Tinubu is that he is politically smarter than President Buhari was, and he will not outrightly reject an electoral bill in the same way that Buhari did, knowing that what that blowback would do to the credibility of his own elections. In the midst of all we're talking about, I think the president will want to make sure that whatever comes from the National Assembly is something that he will be excited to sign. And so that's my academic deduction from what we're seeing, because both chambers went into executive sessions. Both chambers stepped down these issues, and both chambers are saying the House of Reps they're not going to have plenary for 2 weeks as we look at the budget, but the Senate is expected to come back and look at it next week. What is different next week than we have this week is that the president is expected to return tomorrow.
One day needs to be very careful, given the fact, that all the back and forth that we went through with the tax administration law.
Maybe that is what they're learning their lessons from, right? They don't want insertions after the fact. They want to make sure everything is pure. But because these amendments are important,
Absolutely
the penalties for ballot snatching, the penalties for vote buying, whether inmates have the ability to vote or not.
Yes.
I think these are important discussions that we are having. Now, when we talk about the Electoral Act and the amendments we're trying to do when it comes to electoral reform, a lot of people are focusing on transmission of results. That is the last part. We have to think about our register, our voter register. We have to think about accreditation when we say that children are voting in certain areas or dead people are voting in others. We have to think about ballot, snatching and violence. That comes at collation and that comes at the voting process. This act is supposed to treat all those issues. There's different stages of issues. And the way electoral reform works is that if one part of that process is not credible, the whole exercise is not credible.
Absolutely.
And so I think this is something that we need to take very, very seriously.
I thought we were going to go to Anambra and see what was happening with the markets, but it looks like...
No, because that is a very interesting situation going on.
I was looking forward to discussing it, but there will be time, some other time. Maybe it will even be reported in the papers.
Yes.